Welcome to the Orthocast. Today we have Jared. He became Orthodox a few years ago. He was raised Pentecostal, but he did not have all the same online resources that we have today. So I thought his journey would be very interesting to share. So thank you so much for joining us. My first question is, what was your upbringing like? Was the faith taken very seriously in your household? Did you have good experiences in the faith, being raised Pentecostal?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kyle. Really happy to be here. Um, yeah, I was raised Pentecostal. That was I was born into it. And it goes really deep in my family. My mom is a third generation Pentecostal.
Hmm.
So it goes back to my great grandparents on my mom's side. My dad was an ordained Pentecostal pastor. And so it's both sides of the family. My grandpa was also a Pentecostal pastor, my mom's dad. So it's like, the family religion, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in a highly religious home. I was basically surrounded by it. All my friends were at church, and my family, both sides, were all Christians. So growing up, it was really reinforced. I never questioned it, never had issues
Hmm.
with faith. Even though I'm Orthodox now, I look back and I see a lot of good things.
Hmm.
I was raised with faith, so I didn't have to come into that. I got to take with me a lot of things. We believed in the Trinity. We had a high respect for the Bible and, death, resurrection of Christ, and a lot of Bible stories growing up. My dad used to tell me Bible stories uh, before bed. So I was familiar with all the prophets and all these things. So yeah, that was my childhood. But in around high school time, I started going to a private Christian high school, and we changed churches to a Baptist church at that time. My mom and dad were going through a divorce, but at that time, going to a Baptist church and a Christian school, that's where I was first exposed to Christian history.
Oh,
And I
wow.
remember when I made this connection for the first time that, okay, the Roman Empire with their Roman soldiers and things were the same Romans that Jesus was crucified under. And it was sort of like the religious side connected with the historical side
Yeah.
and class. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like Christianity's historical, so that was a big deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my childhood. But in high school, I developed a lot, focused a lot on repentance in God's mercy, and it was surprisingly orthodox. I think God was leading me in high school towards orthodoxy, and it's kind of funny. We went to the Greek food festival at our local Orthodox church, and at that time, I thought I didn't know anything about Orthodoxy. And so when I saw this church, my impression was, okay, this is like the Eastern expression of Catholicism. And
Yeah.
Catholics to me were like, they worship Mary, they worship saints. They all want to burn me on the stake for reading the Bible. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was a positive experience at the Orthodox Church. That was, I guess, the first time I encountered it.
Yeah. So at that food festival when you were in high school, and so how did you like going into college? Were you still like strong in your Protestant faith, or when did you first find out that Orthodoxy was a thing and it was something deeper than just it's not Eastern like it's not just a Eastern version of Catholicism. It's actually like an entirely like new religion.
Yeah, so I could see myself developing, learning and growing in my faith and my knowledge of Christianity. But that kind of stopped when I got to my college years because
Hmm.
I was trying to figure my life out.
Yeah.
My mom remarried at that time. So there was a bunch of family drama, and I got into depression and all this stuff. So
Yeah.
there was about a 5 year gap where I sort of didn't grow at all. And I got to a low point in my early 20s, and I thought, well, I need to make some life changes. I don't know what's going to help, but I'm going to try changing different things. And
Yeah.
I went to my college and I took a philosophy of Eastern religions class,
Oh.
which was a really uh, big deal for me because it exposed me to a lot of new ways of thinking, and most importantly taught me how to think critically and to scrutinize ideas. And that was really the turning point for me. I started asking really hard questions to my Christian faith, not because I was trying to to break it or something. I was just, I enjoyed the philosophical discussions about it, and I had
Yeah.
no concern that it was going to be disproven because it's true. Why would it be wrong?
Mm-hmm.
But as I was asking hard questions, I was not satisfied with the answers I was getting. For example, on the doctrine of faith alone, and I was saying like, okay, if the apostles taught faith alone, why did James literally write the opposite? You're not justified by faith alone. Either he's
Exactly.
terrible at writing,
Yeah.
cannot communicate to save his life, or faith alone is just not true. And it was really a big deal, and it forced me to kind of reconsider a lot of things. And one of the big breaking points was my sister was talking to me about baptism.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from the Baptist tradition, baptism is just something you do out of obedience, and that's it. It doesn't do anything
Yeah.
in addition to that. So I told her like, oh yeah, you get spiritually baptized. That's what saves you, not the water. And then I there was a Bible on the coffee table, and I picked it up and I opened it to a random page, and it just so happened to open up to 1 Peter 3:21, which says, "Baptism now saves you also, not by washing the dirt of the flesh, but by having a good conscience." Towards Jesus Christ, something like this.
Wow.
And it sort of broke, everything that I had literally just said a few seconds earlier. And it was like,
Yeah.
wait a second, water, dirt of the flesh, that's a water baptism, now
Yeah.
saves you also, So it was like, it was just really, really uncomfortable. So I did a deep dive into baptism and used the Bible alone, and I studied,
Yeah.
used the concordance, and I studied baptism. I walked away with the Orthodox view.
Wow.
Baptism is in
Yeah.
water for the remission of sins, and it's salvific. And it
Mm-hmm.
was really groundbreaking
Yeah.
at that time. So that's how it started, kind of the journey. And it was a long journey. Another thing was I was looking on YouTube, and YouTube recommended a video, and it was called something like what Protestants believe versus what the Bible says,
Mm-hmm.
something like this. And it was made, I think it was made by a Catholic. And I was like, okay, I'm like smirking at it, like, let's see what you come up with. And all this video was quotes from the Bible, and every single one was about works in relation to salvation. And it
Yeah.
was like, it just stopped in my tracks, like James 2:24. You see, then a man is justified not by faith alone. Work out
Yeah.
your faith with fear and trembling, and all these things. The sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
That people are going to hell because of what they didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that does not sound like something a Baptist would write
Yeah.
at all.
Exactly.
So yeah, I was just very uncomfortable, and that led me towards Catholicism.
Mm.
But basically, when I discovered the church fathers, that's when Protestantism really ended for me.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a large online community at that time. In fact, I was really surprised recently to go online and see all these YouTubers, and so I was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, this wasn't here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how it started, and I almost converted to Catholicism, but I did not. And one of the reasons, the church fathers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody online had mentioned that there are some letters by some guys who knew the apostles. And it's like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
as a Protestant, you think it's like Jesus, apostles, and then some Catholic-y stuff happened, and then Martin Luther came.
Yeah.
And these church fathers, when I heard about them, I was like, you have to find them. So I ran to the local Catholic bookshop, and I found some books that had the letters of Ignatius, Clement of Rome, and I started reading those, and I was blown away. It's like a mic drop moment. It's like, here's baptism, just like I read in the Bible.
Yeah.
Here's, there's no faith alone anywhere. There's
Mm-hmm.
the Eucharist. There's bishops. And so it's like, oh my gosh, this
Yeah.
this is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you actually went back to the sources and saw that Protestantism was not taught these fundamental things like sola fide, was not taught, and then eventually you ended up, getting that whole church father set, and it's actually an interesting story of how
Yeah.
you got those. But you want to share that?
Yes. So that's the, one of the parts of my story is I had to decide between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. And when I decided to become Orthodox, I visited one bookshop in an Orthodox church, and they had this full church father set, the whole Philip Schaff set, the red, blue, and green set. And I was thinking, okay, this is going to be probably a few $1,000s, but I'm just going to ask how much just for kicks. So I asked the woman, I said, how much are these books? And she's like, oh, let me ask someone. I'll be right back. Since she came back, she's like, $120. And it's like, for one book, one set, or all of
Yeah.
them? She said, all of them. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I bought them all at that moment. And I've been reading them ever since. I mean, there's plenty of literature there to last probably my whole life. But everything I've read so far has confirmed my orthodoxy
Yeah.
and given me a lot deeper insight into the faith, especially the ecumenical councils,
Hmm.
talking about bishops and jurisdictions and territories,
Yeah.
metropolitans. There's a lot of discussion on church authority in the church councils, and never once do you hear anything about the keys of Peter's the
Yeah.
rock,
Uh-huh.
that it's not papal centric at all.
Uh-huh.
So it just reinforced what I had already decided.
Yeah. So at what point did you realize that orthodoxy was an option? Because, when I started looking into Christianity, and when a lot of people, they think it's really just like Protestantism versus Catholicism. But when did you realize, oh, actually, there's another option? Was it reading the church fathers and like seeing these ancient sees like Constantinople and like looking back? Or how did you like know that orthodoxy was an option?
Yeah, this is also a question I asked myself a little bit, because it just, in my memory, it's like, okay, Catholicism versus Protestantism, and then suddenly, like immediately after, it's like Catholicism versus Orthodoxy. So at some point, I picked up, the memo that
Yeah.
Orthodoxy is a third option. Like, I can become Catholic or Protestant, or one of the many Protestant groups, or Orthodox.
Yeah.
And it could be that I visited an Orthodox church and I already knew, like, okay, there's this kind of Eastern branch
Yeah.
of Catholicism,
Hmm.
out there. But it also could have been online exposure.
Yeah.
But I for sure knew that that was something to look into. And it's actually interesting, it didn't have a really strong case. It wasn't really on the table much.
Yeah.
So it was mostly Catholic apologists versus Protestantism
Hmm.
that kind of put Protestantism off the table. But I knew that if I converted to Catholicism, I wouldn't be fair, because I know that there's Orthodoxy and I
Yeah.
need to at least look into it.
Uh-huh.
I need to look into it.
Yeah. And so on those like kind of Baptist issues, like, oh, they worship Mary and the saints. How did you like get over those? Was it seeing that seeing that sola fide was wrong, and so you're like, okay, this system is wrong, and so it was easy to adopt, Catholicism or Orthodoxy because you saw that, or how did you get over that hump? Because that's a big thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think what it was is, once I realized that the Protestants are wrong about faith alone,
Hmm.
they're wrong about the canon of Scripture. I was asking people, like, why is James even in the Bible? Why is this in the Bible? Nobody could answer that.
Yeah.
Nobody could answer those questions, and I wasn't liking the answers I was getting. So in the end, I think it was just down to trust. I
Hmm.
no longer trusted the Protestant apologists anymore. They
Yeah.
say this, they say that, and sorry guys, I don't trust you anymore. Like, you blew that trust when you got wrong on
Yeah.
James, you got wrong on faith alone, you got wrong on bishops, you got wrong on the Eucharist, got wrong on baptism. Why would I trust you? On these other things.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. So, in this process, did you ever like go to a Catholic mass, or did you just go to the Divine Liturgy? And how was that like kind of?
yeah, so this was funny, because I was really, it was almost like a race, like a competition. And at
Yeah.
the same time, in 1 week, I was going to a Bible study with a Seventh-day Adventist. I was going
Mm.
to an Orthodox catechism on Wednesday, Catholic catechism on Thursday, and I was in a like kind of rock band church on Sunday. And
Wow.
this was going on for a few months, having all these ideas. And I was looking for, who's scoring points on logic, on church history, on biblical doctrine, who can back up what they're saying with Scripture,
Yeah.
and kind of seeing where everything, just seeing, like, I want to be open to finding the truth, whichever one of these it might be. And so anyways, I was kind of going to both,
Yeah.
but I didn't even go to a divine liturgy at that time. I was going to a Catholic mass
Yeah.
occasionally with a friend of mine who invited me. And it was very scandalous, I could say, like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, they're wearing vestments, like, whoa, there's a crucifix in here, like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, this is super weird, there's like candles and people are kneeling and signs of the cross. Like, it was a Novus Ordo mass, but
Yeah.
compared to the rock band church, it was extremely liturgical,
Yeah.
and that was culture shocking for me.
Yeah.
But I think it was important. It was an important piece because I understood that, okay, this is not something that comes from culture. This is something that comes from an ancient tradition of the church.
Hmm.
So I think that like liturgical aspect added to the credibility of what the Catholics were saying,
Yeah.
for me at that time. And yeah, so when I went to an Orthodox liturgy, it was, liturgical, and it was kind of like, I wouldn't say it was like, super mind-blowing. It was what I would expect from the Orthodox Church
Hmm.
based off of what it was claiming. It's like, okay, if I go to this Orthodox liturgy, I should see traditions that are ancient. I should see a Eucharist. I should see vestments. I
Yeah.
should see all this stuff.
Hmm.
So when I did, it was like, okay, there it is. Like, it just
Yeah.
it is what they said.
Uh-huh.
you
It
know
it checks off all the boxes that
yeah,
you were looking for. And so
exactly.
in that final decision between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, was it just saying that the papal claims didn't add up, or did you actually look into kind of like the theological differences? Because I noticed that a lot of Catholics now, they don't really they really just focus on defending that the papacy above anything, not
Yeah.
necessarily the theology.
Yeah, so this one was more difficult to discern
Hmm.
because a lot of my like apologist heroes were Catholics. I was listening to like Steve Ray and Scott Hahn and
Yeah.
stuff like that at the time, and there just weren't a lot of Orthodox voices. There was
Yeah.
Father Josiah Trenum, which was a really big help at
Mm.
that time, but just overall, there was a much louder group among the Catholics. But I knew, and I learned this, I think, just from studying philosophy, that you can't just say someone's right because they're the louder group. You have to
Hmm.
actually consider what they're saying.
Yeah.
And what I was looking at from the Catholics was, okay, in the Catholic model, you have the Pope, who's the Vicar of Christ. He's the point of unity for the whole church. That the definition of unity is being in communion with the Pope. That's what it means to be in the church and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And just the ecumenical councils and all these things. But the one of the interesting parts of my journey was on Wednesday. I was at the Orthodox Catechism, and the priest there was talking about the ecumenical councils and the natures of Christ and Arianism, all these
Hmm.
things. And he was like, it sounds like splitting hairs because you're going into all this like theological stuff. But he said faith matters,
Hmm.
because your faith, directs you into knowledge of God, who God is, and keeps you, you know, on the right path, worshiping the right God.
Yeah.
And the very next day, it was like literally the same day after, I went to the Catholic Catechism, and it was a deacon teaching it. And he said, well, Hindus and Muslims and
Oh
other
no.
religions they're worshiping the same God too,
uh,
just in a different tradition.
yeah.
And I was like it was like black and white, like
Yeah.
back to back. And I think that God was already starting to like prepare me for becoming Orthodox in that moment.
Yeah.
But the real big, like the line that I crossed, I said, okay, I literally cannot be Catholic, was when I read one paragraph in the Catechism of the Catholic Church about Islam, and
Hmm.
it said that the
Confess to
basic,
worship the same God,
yes,
something like that. I think it's
yeah, something like
Nostra
this. But
Aetate. Yeah.
the exact phrase was, the first among whom are the Muslims who profess to worship
Yeah.
the faith of Abraham, and with us they adore the one God.
Yeah.
And it was that last part, with us adore one God. And it's like, okay, this isn't some random person on Facebook or YouTube. This isn't one random deacon or priest. Like,
Yeah.
this is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And this is something that has a stamp of approval from Vatican II, which has over 2,000 bishops,
Hmm.
signing off to it.
Yeah.
And after learning about the ecumenical councils, like Acts chapter 15 even said, it seemed good to us and the Holy Spirit, where two and three are gathered, I am in the midst.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, where was God in the midst of 2,000 Catholic bishops when they wrote something that off?
Yeah.
It's like way off. So I basically said that there's no way that this is in continuity with the ecumenical councils when it's just literally black and white.
Yeah.
You know, the church cares about the natures of Christ, the eternity of the Son, like the procession of the Holy Spirit. All these things are so important because they define the faith for us. And then Vatican II, Catechism of the Catholic Church, was just dogmatically way off. And there's you might know, his name's Father Hesse. He's a scholar and a doctor of Catholic canon law. And there's a good video on YouTube by him discussing this particular paragraph from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And you know, he's a Catholic and he's a professor and doctor of Catholic canon law. And he said, I saw that and I had to check it in Latin because I couldn't believe my eyes.
Wow.
And he said, I read it in Latin and it said exactly the same thing. And he said, that's heresy, that's blasphemy, and it's horrible. So it's like, it's not just me who sees it, you know, it's like, it's just so different than what the church always did.
That's what was one of the biggest factors in me leaving Catholicism, was seeing the black and white difference between the pre and post Vatican II teachings. But if you look deeper, it's like the pre and post Vatican I teachings, the pre and post Great Schism teachings. But I think that Vatican I is just so clearly contradicting what the Catholic Church has always taught, what everything. It's a complete reversal of all these very important positions. And I was in the Catholic world, and it was honestly talking to my Catholic RCIA teacher, like telling him that I'm like, this is like heresy. Like, it's telling them that we all worship the same God, and he's just like in full support of it. He's like, yes, like the Hindus, Muslims, like he's just repeating what Vatican II and all this teaches, but that's just contrary to the Bible. It's contrary to ecumenical councils, and it's just so sad to see. And then the Catholics have to rely on these like insane mental gymnastics to try and make it work when it's just clear as day a contradiction. So
yeah, exactly. And you know, it was this idea that really put the nail in the coffin for me. It was like, if this was the church, the Holy Spirit would not let this happen.
Exactly.
You know, that's what I really believed, and I still believe it. If 2,000 bishops gather in Rome, and Rome is the one true Holy Catholic Apostolic Church, and they make a dogmatic statement, that dogmatic statement can't be off, and it especially can't be that off. You know, it's not even possible if that's true. So that's
and more importantly than all the bishops in the Catholic system, the Pope signed off on Vatican II. And so when I was a trad Catholic, all these Catholics, they try and say, well, actually, it was just a pastoral council, so we can actually reject it. They do all these like crazy legalism just so they can reject the council. But it's like the Pope has clearly said again and again that this is a dogmatic council, that you need to accept it. And then another wake-up call was seeing like people live out kind of the spirit of that council. In the like John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, especially John Paul II, famously kissing the Quran, going to Hindu ceremonies, like just embracing this religious syncretism. And so that was like something is seriously wrong in their theology. And luckily, when I was confused, I found Jay Dyer, and he's a great resource on Catholicism. But he also brought up this theological issue of like natural theology, and we're seeing the fruits of that. Like the Catholic Church has built the Abrahamic Faith Center, like kind of built on that presupposition that we all still have the same like Abrahamic God. But that's interesting that you didn't even have to like become Catholic, but you saw that there's something wrong with that. But
it couldn't be the church if it was saying those kinds of things. Like I believed in the power of the Holy Spirit to protect his church and keep it on the right path. And by the way, you said that some trad cats are giving this argument like it's just a pastoral council. I've heard a huge variety of responses to this question. Some Catholics will outright deny it. Like I've had a Catholic priest say, oh no, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. Like you want me to show you? It's in there. Some say like, well, you're just misinterpreting it, and then some will say, well, it's just pastoral. There's all kinds of different ways to try to get around it. But if you really look into it, what does it say? What does it say in Latin? What are the scholars saying? It is what it is. I mean, there's just no way around it. It's, on one hand, I'm thankful because it makes it really clear that the Catholic Church is not the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
and every day Pope Francis just gets more and more heretical. Like there was Pachamama back in 2020,
Oh yeah.
reversing the death penalty, Amoris Laetitia, which contradicts the prior Catholic teaching, and then just a few days ago they had the now you can bless same-sex people, but like
Oh
the
yeah.
unions. So
Yeah.
clearly it's sad to see Rome become more and more heterodox, but this is what
Yeah.
happens when you don't have when the rock is Christ, not a man, not the Pope, but
And yeah, you're right that it goes back way before
yeah,
Vatican II. Also, it goes back to like Saint Photius,
mm-hmm.
like the 8th, 9th centuries around that time.
Yeah,
He's calling Rome out, writing a whole list of things that Rome is doing wrong,
yeah,
already doing abuses.
mm-hmm.
They were, like I think some of his were like bishops are not chrismating. I mean, priests are not chrismating people. Like only
Yeah,
bishops are doing it, where priests should be doing it too.
mm-hmm.
He's saying things like, I don't know, leavened bread or something like
Yeah,
this came up. And
mm-hmm.
it's like, these are small things in the beginning, but it just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
Once you get off the tracks, you continue to go further and further away.
Yeah, exactly. Changing other things like denying infants communion,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
having only celibate priests. You get off the rails and it just goes further and further. So, how was it actually like converting to Orthodoxy? So, at a certain point, you realize that was the big point, and so you stuck with Orthodoxy. You got received into the church, and I believe you actually said some other people in your family also started looking into Orthodoxy. Was it you who
Yeah.
shared it with them, or how was it like? Yeah, that process.
Yeah. So this is crazy. So I have two sisters, one younger, one older. My younger sister, I invited her to go with me to whichever church I went to, and she actually went with me to Catholic Mass. I think she even went with me to a Latin Mass before,
Oh wow.
and then we also went to an Orthodox liturgy. So she kind of just went where I went. I think she might have also been questioning some things, but we both, in parallel, decided to become Orthodox at the same
Wow.
time. I wasn't like trying to push her into it at all.
Yeah.
She made that choice completely independent of me. And like I would say maybe about a year later, I talked to my older sister and she said, "Hey, I'm becoming Orthodox." So it's like, oh my gosh. And
Wow.
and we weren't even in the same state.
Wow.
So I guess she had a coworker that was sharing her things about Orthodoxy, and she was on her own journey, but ended up in the same place.
Yeah.
So me and both my sisters all became Orthodox.
Wow. That's amazing. And so,
Mm-hmm.
since being Orthodox, is there anything that's like surprised you and you're like, wow, this is so amazing, and you didn't really know about it at the beginning? I feel like there's so many things like that. Like, I thought it would be like Catholicism, but a little bit different. But then when I actually like start like living Orthodoxy and learning more and more, I'm like, this is like really different, and the focus is just really different. And it's so
Yeah.
awesome because we emphasize the really, really old things. Like, we always talk about the ecumenical councils, these ancient saints, but we also have the great people in more modern times, like Saint Paisios, Father Seraphim Rose, John Maximovich. Like, it's really amazing, like seeing the like seeing Orthodoxy. So,
Yeah, there are a lot, but I would say coming from a Pentecostal childhood,
mm-hmm.
it's very chaotic. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah,
The theology, the practice, the just your whole view of everything, your view of reading the Bible is chaotic. You read what you want, you interpret what you want, you come to your friend, hey, I think this means this. It's all very, I had this dream, I think it means this. Like it's just
yeah,
all very, you never know what you're gonna get.
yeah,
And you want answers, well, you have to figure it out, and it's gonna be a mess. And I think when I
yeah,
became Orthodox, this like stability,
mm-hmm.
that there's the Christian church, there's a Christian faith that gets passed on each generation,
Mm-hmm.
and you join this family, so to say, of the
Yeah,
Orthodox Church, and you don't have to figure it all out. You don't
mm-hmm.
have to do studies to know what's going on,
Yeah,
because the church is preserving the same thing and passing it on. So you just take from this wisdom and knowledge that's already there. And this has been so like relaxing, I should say. Like it
yeah,
just feels more like I don't have to figure it all out. I don't have to do it.
yeah,
I know that this is the church. I trust it, and I can pull from their knowledge, and the fathers.
yeah. No, it's nice. You can just trust on it. You know it's not going to change. You don't have to know anything. It's just about, your personal, like, it's about your personal prayer life. And maybe some people like you're going to research all these things and, use your knowledge to help others. But like, the old, grandmas or whatever, everyone is just,
Hmm.
just focus on your prayer life. But yeah, I think that's interesting. In, Pentecostalism, it's just a lot of it is just kind of made up. It's very ad hoc. It can lead people into like prelapse or spiritual delusion, because not every dream, not everything is from God. And I think that turns a lot of, like, when I was a atheist looking into Christianity, and I just thought Christianity was like evangelicalism. It just felt very unserious. It felt very made up, because that it is very made up, versus like
Yeah.
Orthodoxy. Everything is very well thought out. It is developed, and we can explain our beautiful traditions, and it's very rooted, and we're skeptical of just blind feelings, or just because you experience a vision. So yeah, that's what was amazing to me, like looking into Orthodoxy, is just the approach, the skepticism,
Hmm.
being able to like submit to the church. It's great.
Yeah, something funny. Growing up, I always avoided the Book of Acts.
Yeah.
Like I would read all around it,
Yeah.
but I just would never read Acts because I always heard and thought that it was the Pentecostal kind of book, and it's like
Yeah.
I just wasn't interested in reading about how the apostles were like shaking and speaking in tongues and falling down. Like just
Yeah.
wasn't interested in it,
Yeah.
But after, when I was in this process of converting towards Orthodoxy, I read through the whole book of Acts and I was really shocked at, like,
Yeah.
Paul is standing up saying the words that I'm saying are reasonable, and he's making arguments and he's arguing
Yeah.
with philosophers,
Uh-huh.
making arguments, and there's a council and they're discussing things. And, there's this like level headedness that was really refreshing. Like, oh, wow, Christianity is something, you know, I don't know how to word it, but it is basically not, random
Yeah.
coming out of nowhere
It's
type of
discipline.
theology. Yeah,
It,
it's discipline, and,
yeah.
and yeah, exactly. It's something you receive, you believe, and you pass on, and that's what that was really for me something refreshing.
Yeah. That's awesome. So one thing I want to talk about is a lot of people don't know about Western Rite Orthodoxy.
Mm.
So you are kind of familiar with it. Do you want to explain that for people who don't know about it? Because it is really interesting.
I knew about Western Rite Orthodoxy early on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so coming out of Catholicism, so I was always a big fan of European stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
was learning Latin, I was learning German. I traveled to Germany. I love the architecture, language, big fan of like medieval kind of styled stuff.
Yeah.
And um, so when it came to aesthetics, I was very much a Westerner and I loved that. So
Yeah.
the idea of having an Orthodox faith in a Western setting um, was really really cool to me. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I used to think about, okay, we have like Eastern Orthodoxy, which continues today. Like you can go into an Eastern Orthodox church and it looks virtually the same as it did 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But if you go into a Catholic church, even the most trad Catholic church, it's going to be significantly different than one 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the statues, they didn't have the, four-part choral, choirs singing these kind of Renaissance style songs. They didn't
Yeah.
have a lot of this, like spires and stuff were new. They used to be more like, something like, I don't know, flatter,
Yeah.
and they would have domes like the Orthodox do.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something still slightly distinctly Western about that kind of, Western Orthodoxy. It always had its own little bit of a distinct flavor.
Yeah.
And it's just missing from the world. If you want Eastern Christianity, go to an Orthodox church. You
Mm-hmm.
want Renaissance Christianity, go to a Tradcat church.
Yeah.
If you want any modern thing, well, there's plenty of Protestants for that. But if you want
Yeah.
the ancient Western Orthodox Church, there's nothing.
Yeah.
You just can't find it. So the idea of restoring that was really cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard about, I think it was St. John of Shanghai said something like about you don't have to be Eastern to be Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so I think they really ran with this and said, well, why don't we just restore it?
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning of my journey, I was like totally for this. Like, okay, we need to have every Western Orthodox church should be Western Rite Orthodox, because we're Westerners.
Yeah.
I want to see, I don't want to see baklava at lunch. I want to see hot dogs and burgers. Like,
Yeah.
but over the years, I really fell in love with Eastern Orthodoxy, the
Yeah.
style. Um, I didn't know anything about Greece or Russia or Byzantium, any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, just learning that, some of their saints and some of their churches and some of their history, it's like, okay, this is actually really beautiful. This is really valuable. I kind of like it more now. If I had a time machine, I'd rather go to Constantinople than Rome.
Yeah.
But so my styling aside, like my taste aside,
Mm-hmm.
I think Western Rite Orthodoxy is really good for churches, for example, like an Anglican church,
Mm-hmm.
and the pastor there wants to become Orthodox.
Mm.
Like, because I've heard of this happening. In
Yeah.
fact, so my confessor priest is a Western Rite priest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he used to be an Anglican pastor. And I think that was the connection. And the idea is that you don't have to just completely abandon everything and become, LARPing as a Russian or something, you can
Yeah.
actually continue to be what you were, just,
Yeah.
within the fold of Orthodox Christianity. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it has a really good place. I think it has a long way to go.
Yeah.
The different rites are very different. Like, there's some Western liturgies online that looks like, wow, that looks like, ancient Western Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some, it's like, it says Western Rite, but it looks Eastern, it's like, it's not very Western at all.
Yeah.
And some are like in the middle, where it's like a hodgepodge of like Western and Eastern stuff. But
Yeah.
I think once they figure it out, maybe they get on the same page. There's different philosophies. Some want to go with like a corrected Catholicism. Some want to go with like corrected Anglicanism. Some want
Mm-hmm.
to do like restored Western Rite. So it's like,
Yeah.
different philosophies. There's a lot of work to get done.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't mind if all churches were Eastern Rite, just because I think that the liturgy of John Chrysostom is universal.
Yeah.
I don't really think of it East and West anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
think of it as there's the church.
Yeah.
And as much unity as we can create, the better.
Mm-hmm.
It's my personal opinion. But like I said, my confessor priest, he's Western Rite. I have
Yeah.
no issue with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really awesome. I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree. Like the Western Rite is something very new. I've heard there are some problems in it, but I think they'll get fixed with time. But yeah, I really have grown to enjoy the Eastern expression, and like you said, it's universal either way, and we can have these different cultural expressions. I think a lot of Western Rite liturgies use the liturgy of Saint Gregory, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
some do. I can't remember if it's like the Russian or Antiochian
yeah,
one. I think it's the Russian uses the Gregorian one.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really awesome. I definitely need to go try out one. But my
yeah.
last question for you is you were recently married. Congratulations.
Thank
But do you
you.
have any tips for young guys, being in the church, being patient or yeah, so any advice?
Yeah, so this was a whole nother chapter of my journey, because when I became Orthodox, I became Orthodox for the faith.
Yeah.
And I didn't think at all about the repercussions on dating life. I'd never even stopped to think about it.
Yeah.
But it does have an effect on that, because you want to be in a relationship with someone who shares your faith.
Yeah.
You want to have one faith in the home, so your kids are raised in the same faith.
Yeah.
That's ideal. And when you become Orthodox, just the size of the Orthodox Church in the West is so much smaller. You have a smaller dating pool. It's just statistics. So you have a little bit of this challenge. And I think right now there's a really like disproportionate amount of young men versus young women who are becoming Orthodox,
Yeah.
which just adds to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But advice that I would give, two things is, one, don't compromise on it. Like,
Yeah.
don't say, well, I'm just going to marry a Catholic or whatever, or Protestant. Like, no, you should marry someone who's Orthodox if you can. Like, don't, like, be patient for that, because it's worth it.
Yeah.
But the second piece, which is kind of paradoxical, is don't expect them to be like super hyperdox Orthodox.
Yeah.
Like, find someone who maybe they're a Protestant, maybe they love Jesus, and then maybe you're just communicating with this person and they become an inquirer,
Mm-hmm.
and they're open. Like that might be someone you want to spend time with and invest your time with,
Mm-hmm.
because they probably in the future will become Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of young men are looking for, okay, I'm looking for this perfect, like super, uh, Orthodox girl. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, probably statistically, you're not going to find it, but you will find a lot of girls who are open to it, even if they
Yeah.
don't know it. They might not even know that they love Orthodoxy yet until they experience it with you. And once a girl like respects you, and especially if she loves you, she'll be willing to listen to you about what you have to say. So sometimes it takes patience, and be open to different levels of faith in a
Yeah.
girl, and kind of meet at her level, and try to be patient with her. Of course, if it's like, if you have a little bit of a risk that after, okay, we've been together a year, you want to be Orthodox or not? No, I don't want to. There's always that
Yeah.
chance, but I think more often than not, a girl who loves God, who loves Jesus, who loves you, she will be much more inclined to become Orthodox than not.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Like, just find
Mm-hmm.
someone who's open to growing with you,
Mm-hmm.
and I think if you pray for them, you're patient, and they really do love God, and you just don't force it on them. Like, you don't want to end up
Yeah.
in like arguments. Just give it time, and
Yeah.
I think it will work out. But yeah,
Yeah. And I'll just add this one little thing, because it's something that I've, my experience over the years, have seen. Most girls convert to Orthodoxy through someone else. It's
yeah,
a friend, or yeah, it's a friend, it's a brother, it's boyfriend, husband. Like, most girls are not going to go online and look for like apologetics videos. Like, I know some girls who do, but more often than not, they're just not even going to think to ask those questions
yeah.
until somebody introduces those questions to them, and they start saying, oh, maybe there is something to this. And especially when they trust you, when they know you, that's when they'll really start to open up. So yeah, people connections are very important.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to end it. Great advice. This was a really good stream. I'm glad we could do it. But yeah, thank you
Yeah,
so
me
much.
too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. God bless.
God bless.